Hello, everyone, and welcome to Clark Art Talks. I'm Kendra Larson. I'm the gallery director over at the Archer Gallery and the coordinator of the Clark Art Talks. Please be aware that this Zoom lecture will be recorded and posted to our website, archergallery.space. There will be time at the end for questions, and I am happy to read any questions that you add to the chat. Today I'm excited to introduce artist Kim Cridler, a metalsmith, educator, curator, administrator, enthusiast, and nemophilist. Okay, I pulled that off of your
Yes,
Instagram.
it means
I
somebody that loves being in the woods.
I love that word,
I didn't
nemophilist.
know I didn't know there was a word for that, but yeah, I was like, "Oh, that's me." Yeah.
Yeah. Am I pronouncing it right?
I
Nemophil.
don't know.
I think that sounds right.
Sounds right.
I'll put a link to that word, or I'll put that word in the chat for y'all.
Thanks. Thank you.
Um, so I met Kim at the University of Wisconsin Madison in 2006, where she taught me about metalsmithing and became a friend. She is an ambitious, hardworking, inspiring artist whose work is both beautifully poetic and thematically powerful. Trained as a metalsmith, Kim was an undergrad student at the University of Michigan, earning an MFA in metals from the state. Wow, I'm really tripping on my words today. Sorry about that. Kim earned an MFA in metals from the State University of New York at New Paltz and studied at Skowhegan School of Sculpture and Painting. Kim has taught in art programs across the country, including the University of Wisconsin Madison, the University of Michigan, San Diego State University, Arizona State University, Airmont School of Arts and Crafts, and the Penland School of Crafts. Her work can be found in the public collections of uh, Arkansas Art Center, Decorative Museum of Art, the Chazen Art Museum, the collection of the Grand Valley State University, the Phoenix Office of Arts and Culture, the collection of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, New York, the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, the Racine Art Museum, the Samuel Dorsey Museum of Art, the Scottsdale Contemporary Museum of Art, and the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh. Her website is www.kimcridler.com. That's KIMCRIDLER.com. And without further ado, please help me welcome Kim Cridler to Clark College.
Kendra, thank you so much. I really wanted to thank you for doing your curatorial work and making these connections, and to Clark College for making the show possible because it was not easy shipping this work. And of course, to Tamara English, whose work I'm really honored to be showing with. So I'm going to start today with one of my favorite writers, art critic Peter Schjeldahl. And he says, all art argues. It's in his lecture, Marginal Powers. But in that lecture, he says museums are not mausoleums for dead art. They are, rather, warehouses for obscure arguments. All art argues. He says his job as an art critic is to contextualize that argument so you can kind of get in on it. But the artist's job is to argue for a world more amenable to what they love. What do you love? So I'm going to start here at home. This was last week, the park where I walk every day at sunset. Jenny Odell, she's an author who talks about bioregionalism in her book, How to Do Nothing. And she sees our physical surroundings as a meeting ground with all of our differences. The physical world may be our last best common reference point. So here we are in Rockford, Michigan, in White Bear. My house is about a half a mile from Rum Creek that feeds into the Rogue River that flows into the Grand River and out into Lake Michigan. And as a family, we've lived here about 12 years, but I actually grew up very close by, about 6 miles away on a farm. This is my great aunt Margaret DeGroot's farm. It was apparently bought by her, an independent businesswoman, for back taxes after the Depression, and was later farmed by my parents. I went back recently after about 32 years. The farm is gone. It's now planted as an apple orchard, but the old house is still there. And in this picture is Bert DeGroot, My great-grandfather was an immigrant and an architect, and he moved this old house and remodeled it. He added formal gardens and stone walls. And this living room here, this picture is from the 40 with my Aunt Margaret in the foreground on the floor. Um, it's pretty much the same as when I grew up. Same wallpaper, same striped carpeting. And what's interesting is that carpet was woven by her from her family's clothes. So I grew up literally lined with material meaning and thriftiness. That's definitely part of it. But she would like poke at the stripes and talk about whose clothes they were and how those people, I came to know them from the objects that they made and repaired. So this culture of keeping, mending, and remembering is truly my inheritance. And so it's really no accident that I went to study craft, um, which at its root is about connecting and serving. This piece you probably know by Paul Revere, and um, it's got this beautiful text engraved on it, presented to the Reverend Joseph McKean by a number of his friends, late parishioners of Milton, as a testimonial of their affection and to hold in remembrance how deeply they regret his separation from them. So you can see that this was more than a utilitarian object. This picture was a vehicle for people's feelings. And then it was sort of codified in form and precious material. So this is really something that I understood since I was a kid, that within these forms lived our histories, emotional, cultural, social, economic, political. This is work that I did in grad school. That was SUNY New Paltz in the early 90s. And you can see I sort of tossed out the need for functional utilitarian qualities because I was seeking these other readings. Still, I'm not a hollowware maker, but as in those vessels, these are some sources around me that I'm really inspired by. Like in this truck ornament, um, this has been added to the function of a steel hauling truck that I saw in Madison, Wisconsin. Um, for what? For pleasure. Or I love how structure and ornament can merge, like these carved brick chimney stacks. Or there's so many examples in nature, like these images of increasingly magnified tangential structure of pine wood. So you see structure on one end, but then towards the end, it becomes almost like a chain where one link leads into another and the whole becomes greater than the individual. So every day I observe pattern, order, and structure in these ways in the fields around my home. And I am a part of this. Nature is our home, our collective home, and we suffer, I believe, when we think we are apart. So this is typical of my work, showing repetition, variation, structural form, and application of ornament. This piece has got these cast bronze bees on this spherical orb. This is beeswax, which I use quite a bit, these tiny panels made of brass wire with these kind of floating panels of beeswax. Or this work that features slip cast vitreous china swallow forms. This was actually just a maquette for a larger piece made out of eggs that was also inspired by studying classical ornamentation and the egg and dart molding that you see in Greek architecture, which also refers to um, ceremonies respecting and thanking the gods by using sacrificial animals, eggs, or this piece where the pattern of the vessel itself starts to break into a new form of these butterflies. So urns clearly are constant in my work, and they've been fascinating to me my whole life. They are so human. They hold grain, they hold wine, they hold the bodies of our dead. Um, there's this lovely quote which I have to share because Anna Ferrello writes in the reading the language of objects. The abilities to hold, to save, and possess are basic human desires that satisfied the earliest human needs. At one time, a container may have been the most valuable possession a family could own. A basket or carved wood bowl may have functioned as a bank, the sole repository of all that was personally owned and cherished. Thus, containers separated the precious from the ordinary, the valued from the valueless. Indeed, our prosperity depended upon the ability to contain. These are some works where I employed hair, horsehair actually, but of course the tradition of using hair in work dates to Victorian mourning jewelry as like a tangible remembrance of this physical being. And when I think about ornament, I acknowledge that it is not original, and for a long time, modernists really thought they really wanted to get rid of this unnecessary application of this thing that they felt maybe wasn't inherently true, like beauty, skin deep. It was applied, it wasn't intrinsic. Um, but also for all of human history, human beings have applied ornament to every conceivable object, whether utilitarian or otherwise, for the pleasure it imparted. And I believe that that's legitimate. And this is kind of referring to um, that use of hair in work. So clearly, in addition to employing particular forms for their content, I'm quite interested in the material meaning inherent in materials. So this piece for her mother. So I make work, and sometimes I do more public pieces. I'm going to show a couple of those, and they're intended to mark moments, both spatially or emotionally, just to offer a little bit of textural diversity. This is a piece that I made for a museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. It's a bronze piece with these slip cast vitreous china flowers. Um, Interestingly, I had worked at the John Michael Kohler Arts Center during their Artists and Industry program as an artist, and that's where artists still can go and use materials like vitreous china, cast iron, cast brass. But then later I was an administrator for that program. This is another work that was in Phoenix. It was for a convention center downtown, and it's a wreath form in this kind of borrowing botanical references from the region. And wreaths have long been associated with entrances. So, on a formal level, halo employs the simple connotation of a ring as continuity or cyclical time, but it also provides a shift in visual texture and focus. This was a project that's really dear to my heart that I did through the Metropolitan Transportation Agency. It's their art and design program. It's the program, if you go to New York City, you see a lot of work in the subways. This was for the town of Mamaroneck in Westchester County, and it's this lovely little town, half water, half land, just north of New York City. And I wanted for this piece to marry a triumphal arch with a grove of trees. This is me like actually drawing this stuff out because I'm analog, not digital. And some of the fabricators that worked on the piece in Gardner, New York, just south of New Paltz, New York. So the finished piece sort of celebrates Mamaroneck, where they say the sweet waters fall into the sea. There's this writer that I was really affected by, David Pye. He actually was a woodworker, but he talked a lot about the workmanship of certainty, which is what we find in mass production or industrialization, where the result is exactly predetermined. And he compared that to the workmanship of risk. That's the work that we make with our hands. We can use all kinds of tools for this, of course, but the quality of the result is not predetermined, but it depends on the judgment, dexterity, and care of the maker. And so he writes, the workmanship of risk may never again provide our bread. It may yet provide our salt. The crafts ought to provide the salt and pepper too, to make the visible environment more palatable when nearly all of it will have been made by the workmanship of certainty. So that again is talking about trying to inject difference or textural difference or tone into a landscape that is manufactured. Of course, there's the business of beauty. This is not a show I was in. I love it. This is William Morris and Company, who also had this idea that beauty is not idle. Is it is an agent of work. and some of the wallpaper samples that his company made. So sometimes I have this wonderful luck of being asked to make something that's just beautiful. This was a commission project for a hotel in Macau, China, and it was simply vessels in a hallway. Um, but I was pretty excited to make something beautiful for a hotel. They were modest sized pieces, like 3 feet, but required a lot of detailed labor. These sort of seed heads were freshwater pearls and soldered steel. And of course, things take longer than I thought. So at the end, all my friends came together to help me build these pieces, to rush them to the shipper, where they ended up sitting in a warehouse in China for months while COVID broke out all over the world. But here is an installation shot. So you can tell I'm engaged by beauty, and I believe that it does more than pleasure. Actually, it leans towards fairness. Or as Elaine Scarry writes, justice. Elaine Scarry writes, a beautiful thing is not the only thing in the world that can make us feel adjacent, nor is it the only thing in the world that brings a state of acute pleasure, but it appears to be one of the few phenomena in the world that brings about both simultaneously. So what's she talking about? Adjacency. If you're adjacent, it means
So
that,
her,
hello?
right.
It means that you are not the most important person in the room, or your town or country. And when you're adjacent and you're not the most important person, then you have the ability to see your relationship to others in a more fair or just way. And Elaine writes that this can happen for a lot of reasons, but beautiful things like a sunset when you're just so engaged and suddenly you're just a tiny little blip. Beauty does it and makes us feel good at the same time. That's pretty powerful. But of course, there is more than beauty and balance and symmetry in nature and the world. I love this piece by Walton Ford, this bough that is so weighted by these passenger pigeons that it falls off the tree. Um, this is a red-tailed hawk that was killing my chickens and then got caught in the netting around an apple trees. I imagine to free it, um, but it just makes me think about the suffering of others. I see suffering all around me every day, and I recognize it as being one with life. This was Juliet after the work of another red-tailed hawk. I have no truck with the hawk. Um, but at the same time, I am so much a part of the world that I cannot help but look at the suffering. So this has become more of a topic in my work, but it's not always as direct as those images because I am embraced by life and I'm going to die. And that's actually what makes me work. So this is the piece in the gallery with that really small bird that's sort of held by the suckering willow. The willow suckers or grows back after it's cut, which is this kind of marvelous quality of its life. But I did want to show any metals people that were interested a little bit about this work in this piece, Thicket, which is similar. It's sort of a vessel shape, but it's talking about a natural growth. And within this piece is the gray catbird, which often sings from inside a bush or small tree. So you can see that I'm sketching out the bird. And although the larger structure is a welded structure, I rely on a lot of skills that I learned as a metalsmithing student to make the smaller details. So in this case, it is soldering steel. So oftentimes in metalsmithing, you will use hard solder. You will actually be brazing, but you're using a silver alloy to conjoin several pieces of metal. And that silver alloy, when it's heated, imagines to get into the structure of the metal and hold them together. Now with steel, which is a ferrous material, it doesn't work as well, but it still works really well in that the steel does not conduct heat well. So you can see on this sample of the bird, this is pretty small, like 18 gauge, 16 gauge wire, but I'm soldering it really, really close together just with regular silver solder. And I can do that because of the quality of the steel that it does not conduct heat well. So I do use these sort of metalsmithing techniques a lot in my work, just in different sort of applications. So this is available for doing small detailed work, whereas in a larger piece, maybe there's only a couple moments where I'll employ something like this. This work is I had a shift in my life that was not entirely expected. I love teaching at University of Wisconsin Madison. I was teaching in the metals area. And then my husband got work in Michigan and I moved back like, pretty close to where I grew up, which was not my intention whatsoever. Um, but it it felt like the end. Like I had the job, my dream job, and then I was gonna like leave and drive kids to soccer, and I was very defeated. But I survived, and I it's been kind of wonderful coming back to where I grew up. Like I was terrified that I'd come back here and everyone in my high school would be like, "Oh, you're back." I wouldn't recognize them anyhow. They're all old. Like we're all so old. But what I do recognize is the plains and the clay and the sand and the trees. And it's been like a beautiful place to come back to. So this work is this sort of bur oak branch on an overturned vessel with a quote on the lip and foot from Ovid, all things change, nothing perishes. And this is another sort of source of inspiration. Again, we do think of ourselves as separate from nature, but we cannot move through it without being touched by life. So this was a piece just inspired by that brooch from the Chicago Art Museum. Witness tree. This is a piece I did recently, and a witness tree can reference like a land survey, like important trees that mark certain intersections of property lines, but it can also, and more literally, just talk about having been there. So this was a tree that was cut in a state park, and they're pointing at the different rings of growth and pointing out when women were granted the right to vote or when Abraham Lincoln was elected as president, that this growing thing has grown through all of this human endeavor and activity. So this piece is a sort of imaginary speculation that when this tree was felled and the hinge was cut and opened, it revealed a part of a human skull that I made out of a mosaic of mother of pearl. Um, but really, like, what are any of us thinking about? And this is a pretty typical day for me. But the best parts of my day, I think, really are hours spent observing and being part of something that's greater than myself. Which brings us to Albert Einstein, of course. A human being is a part of the whole called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few people nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. This was a work that I was really excited to start. It's called Pithos, and it's based on this ancient storage jar. Again, the notion of these vessels as um, being containers of humanity. But in lieu of the traditional ornamentation, I did the sort of modified, kind of William Morris inspired garland of oak leaves. So there it is in my shop. And then I was studying birds and created like a paper pattern to try to. Though my problem is I'm pretty slow when I work. My husband's like, "Can you do that more slowly?" I'm like, "Maybe I'll try," but I wanted to make a whole flock of birds, so I created a pattern, had them laser cut out of mild steel, and then pieced them together so as if they might feel like they're flying through this vessel, like this breath mm, of life kind of blowing through this human construct, in part inspired by this little poem by Rilke. Do you still not know how little endures? Fling the nothing you are grasping out into the spaces we breathe. Maybe the birds will feel in their flight how the air has expanded. Or this piece that's again just soldered, welded steel, mild steel, but then I created this bird form again out of mild steel, and it has a sort of rushing flow of garnets set into brass and some brass leaves. Another Rilke poem. This is one of my favorites. austere, darkening ground. I can't really see it all because I have this image over it, but I'm going to start with grant the churches and cloisters too, and those that labor, let their work grip them for another 5 hours or 7 before you become forest again and water and widening wilderness in that hour of inconceivable terror when you take back your name from all things. Just give me a little more time. I want to love the things as no one has thought to love them until they're worthy of you and real. This is rabbit entrails. I found this one morning on my walk, and if you can see in sort of a clumpy center, you can see the mashed green grass within the rabbit's stomach, still green with the energy of the sun, fueling the rabbit, probably feeding a coyote, and reminding me on this path every day that death leads forward life. Apparently, coyotes don't eat the innards, so when they toss them. And then I started making rabbits because I don't know, like, I think it's the first time it really occurred to me, like, without the sun and the magic of plants and my envy of photosynthesis, none of this would be here. And that just seemed like something worth celebrating. So in the shop, I use a MIG welder, and I'm making this rabbit, but that part of me that loves metalsmithing and jewelry is always still there. So I created this vessel, like the rays of a sun, or a sedge, like a sedgy, clumpy grass, to hold this rabbit. This is a recent piece, Heartwood. It was winter, a lot of winter days walking and just noticing that part of the tree that is more resilient to decay. So this was part of a white pine where you could see the outgirdling of the softwood and the bark, but then the heartwood inside. And I had a great opportunity to show this piece at the Penland Gallery, the Horn Gallery. Such a beautiful space. But this past last a year ago, I suffered a loss. I lost my aunt Judith, and she was the one person a person in my family that I related to really strongly. She was grateful. And about the same time that she died, I noticed, thanks to my dog, that there was a deer like on my path that was decomposing. And so I had this idea that it would be like this magical realism of the deer actually rising out of something, a tree, a limb, something of nature. And this was a stretch for me because I love animals, but I can't say that I'm really great at making them, and creating this sort of structure this was an experience. Um, like even something like a hoof, they're complex, and I made them over and over again, and I finally was happy. And then, because I'm building it together, but in pieces, when the parts come together, I realized that there were some huge problems. Like I finished the head and I was happy with it until I put it on the body. And then I realized it was way too long and I had to cut the little face in half. And I was like, this is terrible, but it's metal. So it all worked. And this is I keep chickens, and they're a big part of my life. And I had these 3 hatch, and they just became like my best friends in the studio. And it was actually hard to get them off of the work. But you can see here, it's not really about the chickens, it's about the limb. I am always seeking direct sources for information because I cannot begin to conceive of the complexity of the patterns and structures that I find in nature. So I'll drag things out of nature into my shop and try to follow it. It's an incredible experience. It gets me out of my head, and I learn stuff all the time. So I was really happy to be able to debut this piece at Archer Gallery. I think that's it. Kind of quick, but it's a little group, so maybe we can have a conversation if you want to ask a question or just enjoy your lunch break.
Woo! Thank you. Are there any questions? Feel free to type them in the chat if you'd like as well. Um,
Yeah, I had a question. Hi, Kim. It's nice to see you. It's Tamara.
Oh, hi.
Um, one aspect of your work that I really enjoy, among many, is how it's one thing when I see it from a distance, like across the gallery, and then I get up close and there's all these wonderful details and texture. So it becomes this time-based experience of like
Mm,
the surprises that show up close by. So I'm wondering how much planning or how you're thinking of those
yeah.
specifics close up.
I feel like I've gotten better at that later in my life. And I want I want to encourage careful looking. It's really easy not to engage that way because I mean, even I have only had a smartphone for 8 years and I have completely rewired my brain to respond to dings, and it's really shocking how adaptive I am. But I want to reward careful looking, and I spend a lot of time really just so fascinated by what I find in the world, in the world of nature, the systems and structures, and knowing that there's no morality over it. There's no right and wrong. It's just life and death over and over and over again. And I would love for people to spend time looking at that because it's really an antidote to my other thoughts about grievances, taxes, current administration, all that crap that it's not going to matter later. So, yeah, I feel like I've gotten better at thinking about how to reward um, spending time looking at something. I know there's this group, I haven't tried this because even I'm timid, and they encourage you to look at works of art in institutions for like an hour, like spend an hour looking at a visual. And I'm not talking about a video, I'm talking about an object or a painting or print. I haven't tried this yet. Sounds like dangerous, right? Like it's hard pressed for me to go to a 3 hour movie. I'm like, oh, that movie looks interesting. It's like 3 hours. Like, oh my God. Do you know how many articles I could scroll through in 3 hours? Like how much Amazon shopping I could get done in 3 hours. But I think it's time to stretch that. So thank you for the really thoughtful question.
yeah, I love that idea. So there is a question in the chat. Do you want me to read it real quick?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so Sally says, way cool. I'm wondering which metal you prefer working with, copper, bronze, etc. And why, or does the piece determine which metal to choose?
Great question. So I was trained as a metalsmith, which meant non-ferrous metals like silver, copper, brass, bronze, and a lot of soldering and forming. And those skills are all really fascinating. But when I was in graduate school, my professor, Jamie Bennett, had a small MIG welder that he used to create structural elements to support his pieces like shelves and things. And I don't know, I had this thing in me, like when I was drawing things, the drawings would go off the paper, and I always wanted to make things like life size. And I was like, soldering, metal vessels, even at 12 to 16 inches, is a ton of work. And it seemed really arduous to me. And I was like, what if I could weld this? And I fell in love with steel. It's mild steel, low carbon content, it's very malleable, it's beautiful color. Um, and I don't know if you're a metals person and you spend a lot of time filing non-ferrous like brass or copper, it's got a real taste, like you have it in your mouth. And steel is very neutral, tastes great. And I just absolutely fell in love with working with mild steel. So that's my primary material. But of course, those non-ferrous can do a lot of wonderful things. Like in the branch piece at the gallery, I have used copper with a non-conforming die. And that means that I make a form with two parts and put copper in it and squish it. And that's how I made the impression of those blossoms. So I had started with I modeled it in clay and then created this two-part die. And then I can manufacture those little blossoms. So for the color, the malleability, copper's great. I love using brass or bronze accents because of the color and the material is very malleable. So like the leaves on that, the deer piece, the name is branching. I put them through a rolling mill with actual dried leaves, so it'll actually pick up the impression of the vein work on the leaves. So metal is amazing medium, and I love it. I love it all, but steel's special and it's less expensive. And it's light and it's strong. It's nice. Thank you for the question.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for all of that. I'm gonna ask you the same question I asked Tamara earlier.
Yeah.
Titles. How do you come up with titles? Are there certain kinds of titles
Oh,
you stay away from?
no. Well, my work is slow. Like this branching piece, I tentatively titled it Yearling before I really started working on it. And I can easily spend 3 to 8 months on a piece. And then with the title, I'm always trying to pull it back. I'm trying to strip it down, strip it down, strip it down. Because I come up with these crazy like Wilco titles, like very romantic, all over the place. Um, but if I can strip it down enough, branching, and then I mean, I just feel like I can get a lot of material out of a word like branching because it's talking about growth and patterns and shifting and changing and moving. Um, and then there's like literal branch in this piece. And so I try to strip it down to like the most simple thing I can say. Um, like with limb, I don't need to say anything more than that. It's a tree limb. We have limbs. We're alive. It's alive. I have vascular networks that carry nutrients through my body. It does too. What I'm trying to say is like, look how alike we are. Yeah. And then the idea of putting coral in it was also about, I mean, if you've read any research recently about trees and their relationship to fungus and the transferal of needed nutrients, materials, like they find salmon in trees in the Pacific Northwest because we are part of this incredible exchange. It's just, you know, I'm not trying to aggressively convince people that we should care, but this is our living body. So it would be nice to care. Yeah. Good question. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. And thank you for bringing up different writers too. I feel like, I mean, Rilke,
Yeah.
and Elaine, what's her last name? Scary.
Here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any other books that you'd recommend for
I
people,
mean,
artists that
well,
are
what I would love to say to
that?
students if they're listening is when I was a young student, I was really concerned that the things I wanted to work on and talk about weren't important, like beauty and ornament and how I felt about where I grew up and how important home was. And that is garbage because if you can look around and do a little bit of reading and there's plenty of smart people that are working on those ideas too. So, um, yeah, if you can research and find allies, they'll we're here to help. We're all here to help each other. And there's so much material that's worthy of our time and attention. So, yeah, you just have to, I mean, reinventing the wheel is time consuming. So, yeah, find some books. I don't read enough though. I'm working on it.
I had a librarian tell me that if you listen to a book on tape, that counts as reading.
Does I hope so. I feel like after I had kids, I stopped reading because my attention was diverted to listening for wails of distress. My kids are like almost 20, and I just started a book club in my cul-de-sac, and my intention was to sit down with my butt in a chair and read some pages. Well, guess what? My first books on tape. Couldn't do it, but I'm going to try again. I'm going to keep trying because I do think it's a little different.
Yeah, I like listening to books on tape when I'm making something. I don't know if you do that, but
I do.
and then when I look at that piece of artwork, then I think about that book too.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
Hi,
Um,
hi,
um,
Kim.
Hey, Frankie, no
Hi.
way.
Hi,
How are you?
good. How are you?
I'm well.
Thank you so much for that talk. You're always so inspiring. But I had a question I was curious about. You were so vulnerable in talking about making that transition from academia to
Yeah.
moving back to Michigan. And I was just curious if you could maybe talk a little bit about how you feel that that move and that adjustment,
Mm.
what it's allowed you to do that maybe you couldn't have done had you been in academia.
That's a great question. Yeah, I loved teaching because I felt like I was learning just as much from the students I worked with. I learned so much in that work. Um, but teaching has been held up in our discipline as a metalsmith as like the pinnacle of success, I think, because it does afford you stability and an income and a certain visibility for your work. And there's a trap in that, um, because for a lot of reasons, and I do really worry about the future of liberal education. You know, having parents press you about the marketability of the skills your students are learning in your classroom. And I'm like, we're learning how to be better human beings. You can't put a price on that, but they don't care. You know, I shouldn't be telling you any of this because you've done it way longer than I have. Yeah, so then I didn't want to leave, and it was divorce or quit your job. So I quit my job, and I was terrified, and I felt just such shame. I just felt so much shame. Yeah, but after a while, you have to get off your butt and, you know, get back to that thing that you profess to love to do. And it has been so rewarding, but I miss the community so much. And I am a loner, and the more I'm alone, the more I'm alone. Like in degrees, I get more alone. That's why I have chickens in my life because I don't have a lot of friends. Yeah, but it has allowed me to go much deeper, and that freedom of like no one gives a damn about what you're making because you're not important is really freeing. I was like, all right, no one cares. No one's watching. No one could give a shit about what I'm doing. It's just me and my chickens. Right. And then it's like, wow, what can I show those chickens? They're just not going to believe this. So, yeah, it's funny.
Well, it's just been amazing to see your journey and I don't know, you just always amaze me. And again, just I'm so thankful that you've had that time. I honestly to be able to think and to contemplate. I enjoy your posts that you post on Instagram and about
Oh,
your
thanks.
walk and everything. So, and again, just thank you so much for your thoughtfulness. I just always have appreciated just the kind soul that you are and the thoughtful soul that you are. So,
The feeling is more than mutual. Frankie, probably don't know this, came to University of Wisconsin Madison and uncovered one of the tools I had shrouded in a drop cloth because I didn't know how to use it. And he used it and gave my students this insight basically on how to become a better human being through a lathe. Remember, you were talking about, oh my God, it was incredible. It was like all of a sudden, when you were talking, I was like, every time I drive, I should be a better driver because here's Frankie at the lathe saying, every time you do this, you know, you get a little bit better and the product is a little bit better and your process is a little bit better. And it was, I'll never forget it.
well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Kim, so much.
Thanks. Thanks, Kendra.
Mhm. All right. Yes. Sorry, Sally mentioned to come down to the Archer and see your work in person. So definitely do that, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks so much. Bye.